Excitedly, Tam quickly bathed and dressed herself in the new clothes. She mounted the horse and set off. The horse galloped swiftly, and before long, they arrived at the capital city. However, while crossing a muddy area, Tam accidentally dropped one of her shoes into the water and couldn't retrieve it in time. When the horse stopped at the festival, Tam wrapped the remaining shoe in a cloth and squeezed her way through the crowd. Just as Tam was about to press forward, the royal entourage happened to arrive at the muddy spot. The two leading elephants suddenly stopped, refusing to move any further. The king ordered his soldiers to search the water, and they quickly found Tam's embroidered shoe that she had dropped earlier. The king admired the shoe, captivated by its beauty, and thought to himself, "Oh, such a beautiful shoe. The woman who wears this must be exceptionally stunning." Immediately, the king issued a proclamation inviting all the women in the kingdom to come and try on the shoe. He declared that whoever could wear the shoe would become his wife. The festival became even more lively as women from all walks of life rushed to the testing area. Each woman took turns entering the majestic pavilion in the middle of the vast meadow to try their luck. However, none of them had a foot that fit the shoe perfectly. When Cam and her stepmother exited the pavilion, they encountered Tam. Cam whispered to her mother, "Mother, even someone like Tam is trying on the shoe." Tam's stepmother sneered, "Ridiculous. The shoe hasn't found anyone yet. The other half is just a discarded piece outside the bamboo fence." But when Tam placed her foot into the shoe, it fit perfectly, as if it were made for her. She took off the cloth and put on the second shoe. The two shoes were identical. The palace attendants cheered with joy. Immediately, the king ordered the procession of maidens to escort her into the palace. Tam stepped onto the royal sedan, capturing the astonished and envious gaze of her stepmother and stepsister, Cam. Although living in the royal palace, Tam never forgets her father's Memorial Day. She seeks permission from the king to return home and prepare offerings to assist her stepmother. Mother and stepsister, Cam, feel envious and resentful of Tam's joy. Now, upon seeing Tam's return, their jealousy flares up once again. Coming up with a plan, the wicked stepmother tells Tam, "In the past, you used to climb the areca tree, so climb up and tear off a chamber to offer to your father." Tam obeyed and climbed up the areca tree. When she reached near the chamber, her stepmother was holding a knife at the base of the tree. Sensing the tree trembling, Tam asked, "What are you doing down there, Aunt?" "There are many ants on the tree, and I'm chasing them away so they don't bite you, my dear." However, before Tam could pluck the areca fruit, the tree collapsed, causing her to fall headfirst into the pond and die. Then she brought her daughter into the palace, deceitfully telling the king that Tam had tragically drowned in the pond, and now she was presenting her own daughter to take Tam's place. Although the king was not pleased to hear this news, he remained silent. Now, let's continue the story. Tam, after her death, transformed into an oriole. The oriole swiftly flew back to the capital and arrived at the royal garden. There, she saw Cam sitting by the well, washing clothes for the king. The oriole landed on a branch and spoke to her. "Hang my husband's clothes to dry, hang them on the clothesline, not on the fence, to prevent any damage to his attire." Then the oriole flew straight into the palace and perched on the windowsill, singing joyfully. Wherever the king went, the bird followed. The king was constantly reminded of Tam and couldn't stop thinking about her. Seeing the bird affectionately approaching him, the king said, "Oriole, Oriole, are you my wife? If it's my wife, come into my sleeve." The oriole flew back and perched on the king's hand, then nestled into his sleeve. The king cherished the oriole so much that he forgot about eating and sleeping.
He ordered a golden cage to be made for the bird to reside in. From then on, day and night, the king was completely absorbed in the bird and paid no attention to Cam. Cam hurried back home and told her mother. Her mother advised her to capture the bird, cook it, and then come up with a lie to tell the king. Returning to the palace, while the king was away, Cam caught the bird, cooked it, and threw its feathers in the garden. When the king noticed the absence of the oriole, he asked Cam, "What happened to the oriole?" "Because I was pregnant and craving for meat, she secretly stole the meat of the bird." The king remained silent. It turned out that the oriole feathers were buried in the garden, which had grown into 2 peach trees. When the king went to the royal garden, the branches and leaves of the trees spread out and formed a round shade like 2 cages. Impressed by the beautiful and shady trees, the king commanded his attendants to hang a hammock between the 2 trees and lay there to enjoy the coolness. When the king left, the branches of the trees straightened up again. Since then, not a day went by without the king lying in the shade of the 2 apricot trees. Cam knew about this and told her mother. Her mother advised her to hire a tree cutter and come up with a lie to deceive the king. Upon returning to the palace, on a stormy day, Cam instructed a tree cutter to chop down the 2 apricot trees and use the wood to make a frame for a weaving looms. When the king noticed the trees being cut, he asked Cam about it. Cam replied, "The trees were knocked down by the storm, and I instructed the tree cutter to make a frame for weaving clothes for the king. But whenever I sat down to weave on that frame, I could hear it cursing me. Dare to rob my husband. I poked your eyes out." Feeling frightened by the situation, Cam hurriedly returned home to seek advice from her mother. Her mother instructed her to burn the frame and dispose of the ashes far away to find peace of mind. Following her mother's advice, Cam burned the frame and carried the ashes to dump them far from the palace. Surprisingly, a tall and lush tree sprouted from the roadside where the ashes were dumped, with its branches and leaves swaying gracefully. When the tree bore fruit, it produced only 1 fruit, but its fragrance spread everywhere. One day, an old water peddler passing by the tree's base caught a whiff of the pleasant scent. Looking up, she saw the precious fruit hanging high on a branch and exclaimed softly, oh fruit, fall into my hand. I will smell you, but I won't eat you." As soon as she finished speaking, the fruit fell right into her hand. The old woman carefully took it home and kept it in her room, occasionally admiring and enjoying its delightful fragrance. Every day, the old woman would go to the market early. From inside the fruit, a small girl with a petite figure emerged, transforming into Tam in the blink of an eye. Tam immediately took the broom to clean the house, cooked rice and prepared meals, and harvested vegetables from the garden to make soup for the water peddler. After completing her tasks, Tam transformed back into her tiny form and slipped back into the fruit's peel. Every time the old woman returned from the market, she found her house tidy, delicious meals prepared, and everything in order, which surprised her. One day, the water seller pretended to go to the market but secretly returned and hid behind a bush near the house. Meanwhile, Tam emerged from the fruit and continued to carry out her usual tasks. The old lady cautiously peered through the cracks in the door. When she saw a beautiful girl, she became overjoyed and suddenly rushed inside, embracing Tam and tearing the tattered husk of the fruit. From that moment, Tam stayed with the water seller, and the two loved each other like mother and daughter. Every day, Tam helped the old lady with tasks like cooking rice, boiling water, wrapping cakes, and arranging betel leaves for her to sell. One day, the king went out of the palace for a stroll. He noticed a clean and tidy water stall by the roadside and decided to stop by. The old lady brought a tray of betel leaves and offered it to the king. Seeing the betel leaves adorned with phoenix wings, the king was reminded of the betel leaves his late wife used to prepare, which were also decorated in the same way. He immediately asked, "Who prepared these betel leaves?" The old lady replied, "These betel leaves were prepared by my adopted daughter." "Where is your daughter? Bring her out here so that I may see her face," the king commanded. The she called Tam. As soon as she appeared, the king recognized his former wife, who seemed even more youthful and beautiful than before. Overjoyed, the king instructed the water seller to recount the story and then ordered his attendants to bring a royal sedan to escort Tam back to the palace. Tam felt scared and ashamed, so he disappeared without a trace, while the king and Tam lived happily together until the end of their days. Thank you for listening to the story.